Pillars of Eternity is a modern take on one of gaming's oldest traditions, creating a role-playing game by utilising the rules and mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons within an interactive pre-rendered world. Isn't that the most deliciously nerdy thing you've ever heard? Just like Dungeons & Dragons, Pillars of Eternity is a fantasy game that allows you to explore its world, meet its characters, and fight with monsters and villains. Communicating its story predominantly through dialogue and stylized text sections in lieu of cutscenes, the writing itself is very well done, which unfortunately just works to highlight how boring and derivative much of the story in the fantasy world is. Pillars of Eternity's weak fantasy plot is not entirely its own fault, but rather a victim of a cultural allowance that has been given to the fantasy genre to manufacture the same Tolkien-esque plot and world for decades. Fantasy is a genre literally without limits. By its very definition, anything is possible. Why is it then that almost every fantasy world we are presented is the same medievalist fear? Why is it this limitless genre feels so limited? Though a surprising amount of variety has been squeezed out of this medieval fantasy over the years, mostly due to tonal variation, Pillars of Eternity lacks even the draw of a unique tone, feeling exactly like 1,000 other fantasy experiences. It's such a shame that Pillars of Eternity fell prey to this genre pitfall, because many other aspects of the game are so fulfilling. In terms of the story, the most rewarding aspect is the inclusion of a companion system. Throughout your travels, you meet other adventurers who can choose to join you. These companion stories are often interesting and varied, and bring a genuine sense of camaraderie. The combat is challenging and has a fairly deep level of strategy, allowing you to pause time in battle, which is recommended as survival often relies on you using this momentary pause to consider your next move. Unfortunately, the combat also suffers from the hackneyed fantasy approach, offering you the same mix of sword fighters and fire-wielding wizards that we've seen 1,000 times. Pillars of Eternity could have been an amazing experience, with deep combat, interesting characters, and well-crafted writing all going for it. But its commitment to absurdly boring and overused fantasy conventions and stories have held it back, adding it to the growing pile of fantasy failures. Join the discussion in the comments below, or tweet me at KabazMac.